Hello, everyone. Welcome to the VIP room of the 26th Annual Damon Runyon Awards. We are live from the Denver Press Club in downtown Denver, and we're so glad that you could join us this evening. This is the first time in our history that we've done virtual Runyon Awards, so you're making history with us tonight. Thank you for being here. Tonight we have our special guest of honor in the VIP room with us, Judy Woodruff, who is the managing editor and anchor of the PBS NewsHour. You know, Judy is one of the most dedicated and hardest working journalists in America right now. I want to tell you a little bit of inside information since we're in this VIP room. We had a really hard, yes, right. We had a really hard time finding a time that would work out to honor Judy in this way because she is working all the time. So it's great that we could be together on a Saturday night. And also in the room with us are the scholarship winners for the Denver Press Club Scholarship. So they are college students from all across Colorado, and I know that they have a lot of questions for Judy to ask in the VIP room tonight, and you will be able to ask your questions as well. The students, I hope, will introduce themselves as scholarship winners and let us all know their names and where they're going to school when they're talking. So I'm going to give them the reminder to do that. Judy, is there anything that you would like to say before we get started tonight?
Well, first thing, Laura, is thank you so much for inviting me. I'm incredibly honored. Obviously, I wish we were all together in person, in the same room, in the same city. I was really looking forward to getting back to Denver this fall, but who knew life was going to be turned upside down. So I'm here in my home in Washington, D.C., where I'm, by the way, anchoring the NewsHour Monday through Friday of every week. But it's such a treat to be with all of you. Colorado, our family loves because we are skiers, and there's nothing like the Colorado Rockies. But to the scholarship winners, congratulations. I can't wait to have this conversation with you. I know you're all at least thinking about journalism, whatever your major is, and I know you represent different schools. So I'm just excited. First of all, I'm excited that you're thinking about journalism. We've never before needed young people to be interested in journalism and to be seriously exploring it than we do right now. If there was ever a time when this country needed the young people like you who are going to be looking up facts, looking up information, informing the American people, this is the time. But we can talk about that. I'd love to answer your questions. So fire away. And I hope that I can see you when you're asking the questions.
Well, the way to ask the question is to type it into the Zoom chat. And we have our folks behind the scene who will be grabbing those, and we'll be able to see the questions. No questions are off limits, so fire away right now as you're ready. While folks are typing in their questions, I'm going to start out. Judy, I have to tell you that I made a call this morning to my friend John Ferrugia, a former colleague of both of ours. I know you were covering the White House at the same time he was. Folks here in Colorado are very familiar with John. I just want to let you know that John still shudders at the thought of you in that, what did he call it? A submarine-like White House, do you remember it?
Yes.
White House press box. And the booth, thank you, yes, the booth. And remembers getting just this very nervous feeling anytime he saw you bent over trying to keep whatever you were working on secret from anyone else. And he said, I can feel that feeling still because we knew Judy had something. And what does she have, and how embarrassed are we going to be when we don't have it? So,
well, John's incredibly generous. He's an amazing journalist himself. But I'm glad that he left out the part that we were still, what I was hunched over was a typewriter. It was not yet a computer. We were on the cusp of computers.
Yeah.
But it was the days of the Carter and the Reagan administration, and we all carried our typewriters around with us. But that's what I would have been hunched over, and boy, those were the days. But I have to say, the booth that the White House reporters still report from is a small smaller than a walk-in closet size. And into that, they squeeze 2, 3, 4, 5 people, correspondents, producers. It's really something.
Well, we're starting to get some questions. We have a question from Heather Davis. How has it been for your reporting during the pandemic? How has it been for you?
Thank you, Heather, very much. It's made it more difficult, no question. And I'm stating the obvious, because what happened the second week of March, we decided, when the rest of the country did, that we were going to work from home. And that meant I actually stayed in the studio for several more weeks because my house was not ready. But virtually everybody else in our newsroom, I would say 90% of our staff, moved into their homes, were able to set up either obviously by computer. Computers are amazing because they allow us to do so many things we couldn't have done back in the days of the Ronald Reagan administration. But we have since been able to edit stories. I have colleagues who are editing tape pieces for the NewsHour at night from their home computers. We've upped our technology skills phenomenally. I've certainly upped mine, and you have to realize I was starting from the basement level. I have colleagues who are much farther along than I am, who are literally showing us how it's done right now. But it's made it harder technologically, and yet we've risen, I think, in many ways to the occasion. It's changed in another way. It's been a good change, and the good change is that we now know that we can speak to the American people. We can get guests who we might have had a hard time getting a crew to, getting the lights set up, the camera, and all the rest. We are now able to talk to those people through Skype, sometimes Zoom, but we are able to go into people's homes, into people's offices, and to bring them to our NewsHour audience. And that has been an eye-opening and frankly positive experience. But by and large, it's been challenging. And the other thing I have to say is that we are all working 24/7. I mean, present company excluded. I try to take a few hours off on the weekends, but I have colleagues who I think they don't sleep, especially our White House correspondent, Yamiche Alcindor, and the producers who work with her. But our entire staff, between Lisa Desjardins, Yamiche, Amna Nawaz, Nick Schifrin, you go down the list, I'm going to leave somebody out, John Yang, Jeff Brown, everybody's working around the clock, and countless others who you don't see on camera.
So true. I love that you can see a silver lining, though, that there are advantages, some advantages to the way that we've had to shift how journalism is done. So getting access to people and bringing that to the American public, fantastic. Duke Hartman has a question, though. When will you get back on set? Do you have any idea?
Well, I actually was back on the set. I came home in April, in mid-April, about 3 weeks after everybody else pretty much came home. We stayed in the studio until we could get everything just right. I usually broadcast around the corner. I'm in my study at home now, but I'm usually broadcasting from our library. But we went back into the studio for the party conventions. So we went back 1 week to get ready, and then the week of the Democratic convention, the week of the Republican convention. But we had to be socially distanced. I mean, normally I would have had a panel of analysts with me, Mark Shields, David Brooks, Amy Walter, correspondents in the studio. But because of COVID, the only person I could have at the table with me and still be the 6 feet distant was Amy Walter. Mark Shields was at home. David Brooks was at home. Our other correspondent analysts were at home. Jonathan Capehart of the Washington Post, and a number of other folks we used as political analysts during the convention were at home. My colleague Amna Nawaz was around the corner, I kept saying, in the other studio in a different set. But all that was necessary because of the pandemic. Our crew were all distanced, masked. Everybody's very careful around each other. And I don't know when we will go back to go back to the question. I came back home again once the conventions were over. I'd like to think we'll go back soon, but nobody knows.
Well, here's another question. Larry Rickman would like to know, looking back over your career, are there any do-overs that you wish you had on a particular interview or story?
I would say about 1,000 or maybe 10,000 or 50,000. I'm pretty hard on myself. I don't think I've ever finished an interview, no matter how well it went, without thinking there was something I could have gotten better. I'm pretty, my colleagues tease me about it, in fact. I mean, my producer and I will be texting and he'll say, well, that went pretty well. And I'll say, no, but I forgot to ask this. Or I think, I think I constantly need to be pushing myself and testing myself. And you might ask, well, why are you doing that after all these years of reporting? But it's just the way I am. I mean, it's just who I am inside me. I feel like I can always do better. So I'd like to point out, I'm trying to think of one example of a terrible interview. There was a time that I fell asleep in the middle of an interview, but it hasn't been in the last few years. I was taping an interview in somebody's office. I think we were talking about trade policy, and I dozed off.
Trade policy will do that to you, yeah. Right. Kevin Dale would like to know if you would reflect a little bit on how this year compares to the rest of your career and how you're forming election coverage.
This year is like no other. I've covered presidential elections since 1976, the Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford campaign. And this one's different. I mean, the pandemic has turned everything upside down. The technology, the fact that every American is affected. It's not as if there's been an economic crisis, which we've had before, or the country's been at war. Certainly that was the case. The Iraq War was a major factor in the presidential election of 2004 when George W. Bush was seeking re-election. Barack Obama was running against John McCain in 2008, and the economy was uppermost in everyone's mind because of the financial collapse. You can think of a big story, big issue that was gripping the country, but nothing like this, where we have this pandemic, which is affecting everyone's life and making people fearful and worried for all understandable reasons. It's affected the economy, tens of millions of people out of work. It's affected what we think about our healthcare system. And on top of that, in the wake of the death of George Floyd, we're having this entire racial reckoning in our country around social justice. So all of this is going on at the same time. At the same time, technology is changing. Social media has exploded in terms of its influence on the American people and on journalists. So the way we cover the news itself, it's just different in every way. I don't know if I answered the core of the question, but...
Well, don't worry, because I do want to say that if anybody's question doesn't get asked, we will carry it over to the main program, and we're going to talk more about that very topic. So I want to go on to Jennifer Watson's question, because I know it will be near and dear to your heart. She'd like to know, what is the continuing legacy of Gwen Ifill in your newsroom?
Well, I'm so glad that you asked, Jennifer. Gwen, of course, was an icon in American journalism, not just in television journalism, but American journalism. And she was not, people like to say, well, she was a pioneer as the first African-American woman. Yes, she was a pioneer, first African-American woman to co-anchor with me, I'm so proud to say, a national newscast. But beyond that, Gwen was simply a remarkable journalist in her own right. Journalists who were print, broadcast, all looked up to Gwen. She knew from an early age she wanted to be a reporter. She started out at a time in the 1980s when, frankly, blacks were not as familiar in American newsrooms, and she had quite a lot of stories to tell about what she experienced in her early years. But she persevered. She got, went from success to success. She started in newspapers, then of course went to NBC News, and then came to the NewsHour in 1997 and was there for almost 20 years. So she was a pioneer, she was my hero, and she was a great friend. So for me, it's a personal loss, and we miss her every day. Yeah. We think about her every day.
I know that you do, and she was enormously beloved here in Colorado. She had made several trips here and done work here that people felt connected to her. And so thank you for that. We'll talk a little bit more about Gwen in the next session too. I want to go to one of our scholarship winners, Robert Tan. He would like to know, you started at a local news station and now you're on a national stage. At this time when local news faces uphill battles, we'll call them, or he'll call them, what's your view on how local and national outlets can better help one another?
It's a wonderful question, Robert. I do worry a lot about, I worry all the time about media in general, the strength of news media in this country, but I especially worry these days about local journalism, the strains, the financial strains, because of the business model. People are so used to getting their news for free, and that's hurt a lot of newspapers. It's led to the demise of too many newspapers. So many journalists have been laid off across the country. But I want to think that one way national journalism can help local journalism is by pointing our audience as frequently as we can to the work being done by local journalists. I mean, for example, at the NewsHour, we do, when we can, and we need to do even more of it, bring on local reporters who, after all, are on the front lines and often have the best information about a developing story, whether it's what's going on in Portland, Oregon with the protests there, or now the terrible fires, or any other local story you can think of. It's incumbent on us to point to our sisters and brothers in local media and to say to the national audience, we need to support them. They're doing critical work. And if they're not there covering whether it's the school board or the city council or something happening in the state legislature, then no one knows about it. And that's the fiber of our democracy. We are not a strong democracy unless we have a strong press. And that's why we all need to just do everything we can to support each other.
Oh, thank you, Judy. We're going to get back to that topic, too. I have a question from Casey Nicklorick. Every day there's a new blockbuster story. Yes. There's only so much the average American can absorb. How do you help the public sift through the news and prioritize?
Well, that's our job. I mean, that is our job as journalists. My almost, more than 40 years of being a reporter and sifting through the news of the day, but it's never been coming as it is today, as the question suggests, out of a fire hose. I mean, we have a story an hour, a story every few minutes. I mean, there are nights when we get ready to go on the air at 6 o'clock Eastern for the NewsHour, and there'll be 3 or 4 or 5 breaking stories. Mm-hmm. Often they're from the White House, sometimes from a presidential tweet, but sometimes a court will have handed down a ruling at 5:30 or 5:45, or sometimes there'll be a major announcement or a natural disaster. And we have to be prepared using our collective news judgment to make the right decision. But that's our job. That's what that's what I got into this work for, because I love reporting, I love journalism, and it's another reminder of why, as wonderful as the Twitter and the rest of social media is, and the fact that more Americans can, in a way, participate in journalism. They can take a picture with their iPhone and send it in, and they become part of news gathering, and I celebrate that. But we are always going to need editors, people who are vetting information, who are making decisions about information, not because we're taking that decision away from the public, but just to help people, frankly, absorb it. You can't possibly handle everything coming at you, the fire hose. And it's our job to, frankly, to do some of that prioritizing.
Excellent. I'm going to go back to one of our scholarship winners, and I think his question will be of interest to all of them. Sam Sanson wants to know, if you could go back in time and give your 22-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Wow, what a great question. Thank you, Sam. I think I would say, just remember you're in this for the long haul. There were moments in my early years as a reporter when things didn't exactly turn out as I wanted, when I didn't get the assignment or I didn't get the role that I wanted in an election night or something or other. And I would get very, very discouraged inside. I would keep going on the outside, but I think I let it hold me back a little bit. And I think I would have told myself, if I had had the chance as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old when I started my first job as a reporter, to say, just take a deep breath. There are going to be setbacks. It's not going to be perfect every minute of your career, and just hang in there. Of course, who knew that I'd be doing this many years later? When I started out, most people reported, for 10 or 20 years, maybe 30, but then they stopped. Today, we keep going. We're all living longer. We're trying to stay healthy. And frankly, women are given an opportunity to stay on television longer than we were then. You just didn't see women over 40 back when I started in television. So we've come a very long way.
Okay, another scholarship winner, Bailey Campbell. During these trying times, how can we as young people continue to develop our skills and find job opportunities?
Is it Bailey, is that right?
Bailey, yes.
Bailey, you can do that by, frankly, working hard, which I'm sure you already are, asking a lot of questions of the people around you who already have the skills and whose work ethic you respect. Talk to them about things that you need to work on. Get advice from them. Try to find somebody. I think the term mentor is kind of overused. We all need a number of mentors in our lives. We need a number of people we know we can turn to. But find one or two others who've been around for a while, seek their advice. And in terms of the job will come. If you love this work, if you're curious, if you stay with it and you don't get discouraged because your favorite local newspaper went out of business or isn't hiring right now, there'll be another opportunity. There'll be another way to report. There's so much wonderful work being done right now online through digital operations some of them are very new, some of them have been around longer. There will always be a need for information, whether it's coming from the Denver Post or the Washington Post or another newspaper or from the PBS NewsHour. There's always going to be a need for information. So just know that there'll be a place for you, and don't get discouraged. Don't get discouraged.
Thank you, Judy. I want to go to a question from Timothy Haddon. How do you think we should combat the issue of news being labeled as fake news?
Well, first of all, I think the term was misused in the first place. We heard a number of our political leaders, including the president, say that that news that we don't like is fake news. And it's unfortunate. In most cases, not true. Most of the journalism I know is well vetted, well reported, and solid. Doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. We do. And when we do, we need to correct it as soon as possible. That's my philosophy. It's the NewsHour philosophy. And it's the philosophy of every journalist I respect. But we need to make a distinction between this unfortunate label, which I think is a misnomer. Most news, I think, is reliable news. And I'll get to that in a minute because I know there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. If it's news from a legitimate source, if it's information that reporters we respect have spent time working on, have vetted, it's news that generally we can trust. Understanding sometimes it's a developing story, information needs to be updated, and people are human, they make mistakes. Having said that, we all know that now there's an industry, online especially, and digitally and in social media, just pushing false information, fake stuff. We know there's foreign interference in our election in 2016. There is again in 2020, pushing false narratives, false stories, creating fake news websites, and that we have to make a distinction. But and we can talk about that at length. But I think it's important to distinguish between that deliberately fake information and saying that any news that I don't like, if I'm a politician, and the news is mildly critical of me, it's fake. we have to be careful. That's just not the case.
Thank you. We have, I think, another scholarship winner, Isaac Vargas. In your opinion, Judy, what needs to happen in order to have more diversity, especially Black and brown voices, in our newsrooms?
Great question, Isaac. We need to keep at it. We need to keep at it. It's something we talk about every single day at the NewsHour. We talk about in terms of our correspondents and our people who are on air and off air, our correspondent corps. We talk about it in terms of the guests we have on the program to interview as either experts or analysts. Sometimes you don't have control over that. If you're interviewing, last night I interviewed the governor of Oregon. She happens to be a white woman. When you're going in for an elected official, whether it's Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi or the President or Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, these are people who were elected to their positions. That's who you're going with. But when you have a choice of, say, you're looking for a senator or a representative or an expert on healthcare, on education, on the economy, we feel we have an obligation to look broadly and to be diverse in the way we look. But we can never rest. We always think we can do better. We have to do better.
Thank you. We're going to have one last question in the VIP room, and then we'll mix and mingle a little bit. This one is from Jim Clark, and he's a character. Do you have an all-time favorite story, one that you look back on and say, hell, that was a lot of fun?
Oh my gosh. Well, let me think. Probably this is really going back in time. When I was covering the Carter White House, this would have been 1978 or 79, Carter was having a lot of trouble in the polls, and they decided that they were going to do a river trip down the Mississippi. So they hired a couple of, I don't know what you call barges, steamships, the kind that tourists travel the Mississippi on.
Right,
and
right.
They took a press pool. And we stayed on this, we got on this, I want to call it a boat.
Maybe a paddle wheel? Boat. Was it a paddle wheel boat up and down the
Yes.
Mississippi?
Yeah, one of those big
yes.
wheel boats. And I thought, this is great. I volunteered to go for NBC. I was with NBC News. We, needless to say, it was not exactly what we had expected. It was noisy. You could smell the fumes of whatever the motor was going the whole time, even with the wheel. None of us got any sleep. We were worried at any minute that President Carter would go out on the little deck and make a statement. So we were constantly peeking out of our cabin. But I haven't been on the Mississippi since, so maybe that tells you, what kind of an experience it was. But it is a reminder that when you're covering the White House, you basically go wherever the president goes. And whether he's going to his golf club in Florida or his ski resort or favorite ski place in Colorado or his peanut farm or the Mississippi River, you go with him. And you experience. But I have, in the end, it was a lot of fun. We all got a lot of stories out of it. But as I said, I haven't been back on a Mississippi riverboat since.
Well, I don't know if this riverboat had a calliope on it, but the music from a calliope I'm familiar with from boats on the Mississippi, and that would have kept you awake if nothing else did. Those are great stories, Judy. We're going to have a lot more stories from Judy in a moment. But we're going to begin to wrap it up here in the VIP room. We want to thank you all for joining us here. And what will happen next is a bit of mixing and mingling. We're going to be putting you into rooms, table talk, and you'll meet some new people. And when we've done things like this and other Zoom, you'll have a lot of fun. So now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Mike Nelson.
Thank you very much, Laura, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first virtual Damon Runyon Awards. I am Mike Nelson, the chief meteorologist here at Denver 7, the ABC affiliate, and I will be your host for tonight. Before we start our program, we're going to try and recreate what would be the cocktail hour. And so if we're in person right now, easy for me. It's all right behind me in the bar here at the Denver Press Club. But for the rest of you, grab your favorite drink and maybe it's that golden ginger beer that came with your gift boxes. What we're going to do for the next 20 minutes or so is split you into randomly assigned Zoom breakout rooms so that you can talk amongst yourselves and get to know each other. Don't be shy. It's a great opportunity to introduce yourself, talk a little about what brought you here tonight, and we will have a countdown clock to bring you back in just a few minutes for the start of our big production. So our maiden journey on this, I think so far it's gone exceptionally well, and we will see you all very soon. Enjoy, and now we'll go and break out into some of those Zoom chat rooms. We'll see you in just a little bit. Welcome back, everybody. I just wanted to show off my Tweety Bird mask. I don't know about you, I'm having a good time with different mask styles and stuff. And this one's really handy because it's got a little thing like that you can just put there so you have to hang it off your ear. We're learning so much. We hope that you enjoyed getting to know each other in your breakout rooms, and now it's time for the main event, the first ever virtual Damon Runyon Awards. As a reminder, before we get started, for those participating via Zoom, please mute your microphone so that everyone can hear. That makes it a little bit easier for everyone to enjoy tonight's program. So I'm here along with a small contingent at the Denver Press Club, and normally the bar is not nearly this empty, but we'll just imagine people all behind me. It's the nation's oldest press club, having held its first organized meeting in 1867. I remember it. It was really a fun night. This is the club's biggest event of the year, and of course it looks a little different this time. Typically, you'd be sitting here with me at the Denver Press Club, and then across the street we'd head to the Denver Athletic Club. And in the audience you'd be enjoying a meal and maybe a drink or two, or maybe a few more. But 2020 has thrown us quite a few curveballs, and so this year you're going to be joining virtually from your homes with your gift boxes full of snacks and drinks. 2020 can't cancel everything. We've adapted. We found a way to keep the time-honored tradition of the Damon Runyon Awards now in its 26th year. Tonight we celebrate the legacy of Damon Runyon, who began his career more than a century ago in Pueblo, honed his craft in Denver, and became an early member of the Denver Press Club before establishing his legacy in New York City. And tonight, we celebrate the outstanding work of Judy Woodruff, our Runyon Award recipient. Her work has taken her from local TV to NBC News to CNN to PBS NewsHour, where she's now the anchor and managing editor. She's covered every presidential election since 1976, and for those of you counting, this year makes an even dozen election seasons. And she's joining us tonight virtually. We celebrate the investigative journalism that shines a light on important causes, like the work of our Nakkula winner, Kyle Hopkins. His work with the Anchorage Daily News revealed a sexual assault crisis in rural Alaska, in communities with the highest rates of assault and suicide and domestic violence. And we celebrate the future of our field by honoring 9 student journalists from Colorado colleges and universities with a combined $15,000 in scholarships. And it's all thanks to you. Let's hear more about their stories.
The Denver Press Club has been awarding scholarships since at least the mid-1950s. We have newspaper reports, our own records that suggest that we have awarded scholarships to at least 150 students, likely much more, and in total, including this year's amount, awarded over $175,000 in scholarships. And they all go to student journalists at a Colorado college or university.
Hello, my name is Joyce Lee Webb. I am a senior at UCCS this year in Colorado Springs, and I am a major in philosophy and English with a rhetoric and writing emphasis. Ever since from a young age, I was really adamant about writing, and I love expressing myself through words, but I thought journalism was a great way to get into advocacy to ultimately help people.
My name is Robert Tan. I'm an incoming senior at the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm majoring in journalism, and I'm doing a minor in technology, art, and media. I always knew that I enjoyed writing, and I enjoyed storytelling, and I enjoyed listening to people's stories and just the whole aspect of communicating with other people and learning about themselves and the world around you.
My name is Isaac Vargas. I graduated from the University of Denver this spring with double majors in political science and journalism. I went to Denver School of the Arts here in Denver, where I majored in creative writing. And there I was able to just kind of really develop my skills as a writer and fall in love with the art of telling stories, of creating stories.
My name is Melanie Velasquez. I graduated from Colorado State University, Pueblo, this summer, 2020. I have my bachelor's in mass communication and journalism. My mom always gave me the love of books. You can read a book and just escape, and a well-written book can just jump out of the pages. And I thought, if you learn how to do that, you can tell stories to anybody.
My name is Bailey Campbell. I am a recent graduate of the University of Northern Colorado. My major was journalism and my emphasis was strategic communications, and I have a minor in art and design. I got my first camera when I was 14, and I fell in love with the craft, and I really became infatuated with being a source of confidence for people.
My name is Brooke Buchanan. I just graduated from Colorado State University with a journalism and media communications degree, and I am an aspiring photojournalist and videographer. And I liked that freedom and flexibility to pursue different types of storytelling and different types of media like photo and video and writing at the same time.
I'm Heather Davis, and I am a student at Metropolitan State University of Denver. I'm majoring in journalism with a minor in criminal justice. I was working for independent authors and a small publishing house, and my advisor asked me, she's like, have you ever thought of journalism? And I'm like, no, but then they took me under their wing, and it's been fantastic ever since.
My name is Elias Sporn, and I'm a mass communications major at Colorado Mesa University with a minor in graphic design. I ended up making a short-form documentary on the drag scene in Grand Junction. And it's a small but burgeoning scene that was one of the most interesting experiences of my life, really. I think it was the first thing that kind of turned me on to journalism in general.
I'm Sam Sanson. I grew up in Littleton, Colorado, and graduated from Colorado College in the spring with a major in film and media studies and a minor in journalism. I started a radio show on campus with one of my friends, and he listened to lots of NPR and got a chance to make some NPR-style stories. And it really clicked, and I realized that that was something I would be interested in.
Jill Rubin started dancing at hockey games with her mom, dad, and little brother growing up. She became a diehard fan. Cameramen took notice of her and put her on the Jumbotron. Now, Rubin is 39. She goes to almost every home game, sits in the same seat, and dances to the same song every third period. Strike It Up by Black Box.
To work in this field, you need to be able to produce great work, and it doesn't matter whether that's written work or photographic work, video work, graphics work, whatever it is. We really focus and weight most of the selection criteria on the work that's produced.
The first story that I reported was on our Mosaic office, which is a space for students to feel safe, especially students in the LGBTQ spectrum and anyone who doesn't feel like they really fit in on campus.
We had a burglary at the school, and I'm like, hey, that'd be good. So I called the newspaper, and they're like, sure, go ahead. And so next thing I knew, I was talking to the chief of police, writing this burglary story.
We need your expertise, we need your passion and enthusiasm, and we need your ability to tell the world stories.
Making our subjective truths come together to meet an objective truth, I think that is something that is ultimately what I want to strive for in my journalism career and my storytelling.
I learned how to ask thought-provoking questions in order to create a more compelling story.
It's in your best interest to question everything.
I think just the skill of asking questions and being willing to have honest conversations with people, to me, is something that I had to work on early on. I'm much more comfortable now inviting someone to sit down, having a conversation with them, asking questions.
The dishonest media which has published one false story after another with no sources, even though they pretend they have them. They make them up in many cases.
I see the term fake news and that the press is the enemy of the people. I think it's too broad of a brush to be painting the media with.
It breaks my heart because we have, sorry, this is so emotional for me. There are journalists getting ready to graduate from school who won't be able to find jobs because of it. And there's old journalists who've been working and they're gonna lose their jobs over it.
Anyone who thinks that media is the enemy doesn't realize that media is trying to report the truth, trying to be, the eyes and ears of the people.
I think that when people start to just distrust media as a whole, I definitely just get encouraged to create stories that will change people's minds.
Someone working today who I admire in journalism is Julie K. Brown at the Miami Herald. She cracked that whole case open again about Jeffrey Epstein.
When I was 9 years old, I saw a picture of an execution that was done in Saigon, 1968. The photo was done by Eddie Adams of the Associated Press, and it bothered me so bad. I asked my mom, how could someone just stand there and take a picture of something so horrific? My mom said, that's what journalists do. It's a hard job.
This award means a lot less trying to find money during the semester. It means that I can focus my energy on my studies more. And if my daughter needs help with her schoolwork, then I can help her too.
I was proud of the work I was doing, but I didn't really know if it was to the standard I should be at. But getting this award kind of was inner validation for me that yes, this is something that I should be doing. This is something that I clearly enjoy doing, something that I'm good at.
It's very inspiring and uplifting to know that someone's willing to give money to young professionals like myself to continue to pursue the importance of storytelling and that passion.
The selection committee was incredibly impressed with the quality of applications and the quality of the storytelling that we saw. Gives me a lot of hope that the student journalists that we have coming up through the ranks are going to be making an impact right away.
I would definitely want to thank Tyler and Dylan Nelson, my film advisor who helped me in the podcast process, and the journalism professors, Corey Hutchins and Stephen Hayward, my parents who paid for my college, and my twin sister who always looks over my projects.
I am a mother of 4, and all my kids are in their 20s. My youngest is 20. She's gonna have a baby in November, so I'll be a grandma. And they've been my biggest support. They let me read to them things that I've written.
My parents have been instrumental in helping me get through this. In the press club, they've been here, and my professors.
I would like to thank Stephen Fox, as I think he has inspired me greatly, and I strive to improve my work because of him. I would also like to thank my parents because they put up with a lot of me calling them on the phone and telling them I need some advice about this thing I wanted to write about.
For me, this award would not have been possible without the support and the mentorship from Dr. Lynn Schofield Clark at the University of Denver, Andrew Matrenga, and Dr. Lisa Martinez. Those are just 3 professors and 3 mentors in my life that really pushed me to be better, to do more.
I want to thank my family, my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister. Have always been so supportive of this path that I'm going down, and have always been so excited to read my new story, see it in print. I want to thank again my editor at the Daily Camera, Julie Vassar Henderson, for just being a great mentor for me. I would like to thank Gil Azakawa at the CU Independent for being a great mentor. Just anyone who ever read an article or liked a tweet or a Facebook post.
I want to thank all of my supporters, of course, Jay and Sean. I'd like to extend that thank you to the rest of the faculty at UNC for being so supportive. Of course, my friends, but most importantly, I want to thank my family because they have been so unconditionally supportive of me. They never once told me what I was supposed to be. They've just been right behind me the whole time, cheering me on, and that's something I'm extremely grateful for.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, your John C. Ensign Memorial Scholarship winner. And your Damon Runyon Scholarship winners.
Congratulations to all of our scholarship award winners. One more time, those scholarship recipients are Elias Bourne, Colorado Mesa University, Brooke Buchan from CSU in Fort Collins, Bailey Campbell, University of Northern Colorado, Heather Davis, MSU Denver, Melanie Velasquez, CSU Pueblo, Robert Tan, CU Boulder, Isaac Vargas from the University of Denver, Joy Webb, CSU Colorado Springs, and the overall winner, Samantha Sanson, Colorado College. And Samantha will be, hang on just a second, gotta find my spot. She will receive the John Ensslin Memorial Scholarship for $3,000. They are the future of journalism, and I do agree with Dan, they give us great hope. But let's take a look at our past. So much has changed in 153 years since the Denver Press Club began. Who would have thought back in 1867, when a group of journalists gathered at Wolf Londoner's General Store, that they were starting a tradition that winds all the way through to tonight? Think about it. 1867, Andrew Johnson was president. Colorado was still a territory. The Denver Fire Department was 1 year old. The University of Denver was 3 years old. The Denver Press Club is older than the Denver Public Library and the Denver Post. The club outlasted Rocky Mountain News, see a few people shedding a tear here, and other newspapers. And we have survived floods, world wars, Great Depression, the Great Recession, and at least through this date in September 2020, and hopefully will continue for a long time to come. With everything that we've gone through, the global pandemic, civil unrest, the terrible fires, the horrible storms, whatever the November election has in store for us, we're still here, investing in journalism through our scholarship program. We provide journalism and the public affairs-oriented panels and programs that are open to the public. And we also honor great local journalists with our Hall of Fame. And when it's safe to gather again, we will still provide a gathering place, just like we did in Wolf Londoner's General Store. I'd like to introduce the Denver Press Club president, Dan Petty. Dan is a journalist who's worked for many years for the Denver Post, and he is now the digital director of audience development for Media News Group. He's also pursuing an MBA at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Dan's doing a great job guiding the Denver Press Club through some pretty uncharted territory this year. Let's welcome him and acknowledge all that he's done for the club. Dan.
Thanks, Mike, for being here tonight.
You bet.
For hosting for us. Welcome to tonight's celebration honoring journalist Judy Woodruff for the 26th annual Damon Runyon Award. And thank you so much for joining us. We're proud to have you joining us, and Judy joins us, joins many other legendary Runyon winners. Most recently, Washington Post reporter Bob Woodward, alongside Jimmy Breslin, Pete Hamill, Ted Turner, Anna Quinlan, Tim Russert, Maureen Dowd, Rick Riley, PJ O'Rourke, and so many more. Tonight, most importantly, we presented scholarships to a diverse group of journalism students with inspiring stories from 9 Colorado universities and colleges. They are our future, and it's truly the club's mission to support them. Many students who have won these scholarships go on to great journalism careers. Allison Sherry of Colorado Public Radio, Elizabeth Hernandez of the Denver Post, Sarah Castellanos of the Wall Street Journal, Dylan Thomas of CBS 4, Alicia Wallace of CNN are all past scholarship winners, just to name a few. Before I continue, I want to thank all of our sponsors for tonight's program. Our college sponsors, Colorado College, Colorado State University, Metropolitan State University of Denver, the University of Colorado Boulder, and the University of Northern Colorado. Our bronze sponsors, AAA Colorado, Aero Electronics, the Gazette, Colorado Politics, Clarity Media Group, the Colorado Sun, Ground Floor Media, Sander Marketing, IMA, KUSA 9 News, Crystal Media, the Denver Post, KMGH Denver 7, Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association, and United Healthcare. And our gold sponsors, Rocky Mountain PBS, Colorado Public Radio, and the 1010 Group. Nearly all of our sponsors and you, our attendees, stuck with us this year despite the turmoil and unexpected change in format. Thank you for your understanding and patience. It means the world to me and to this club. I want to recognize Mike McClanahan and Dwayne Dewey Howe, who have been in attendance for all 26 of the Damon Runyon Awards and are watching with all of you tonight. I also want to thank Elizabeth Skews, the Nakkula Award coordinator, and Chuck Plunkett for organizing the judging for the Nakkula. And I also want to thank the 1010 group for their absolutely fantastic work on the scholarship video that you just saw. Many thanks to Jerome Ryden and Sarah Crocker and all the judges for serving as co-chairs of the Scholarship Organizing Committee that selected those students, and Charmaine Brown of the Denver Foundation for setting up the application, vetting applicants, and administering the scholarship. I also want to genuinely thank the Board of Directors for both the Press Club, our nonprofit, and the Press Benevolent Association, our for-profit entity, because none of our success is absolutely possible without them. We all volunteer our time every week to keep this place going. Jim Clark, Vice President, Kevin Vaughn, Treasurer, Megan Yergemeyer, Secretary, Laura Frank, Holly Gaunt, Jim Hill, Skylar McKinley, Roger Ogden, Noel Phillips, and Larry Rickman. I also want to take this moment to recognize the contributions of General Manager Tom Fouch, who recently left us to take an exciting new role at a private club in Nebraska, where he intends to retire. For the last 3 years, he's brought hard work without complaint and a spectacular level of professionalism and dedication. We will miss him, and once we can safely reopen for large gatherings again, we will host a belated celebration for him. For now, we're working on reimagining what that role should be. The board's goal will be to hire somebody as an executive director focused on fundraising, applying for grants, building our endowment, while we also hire a board manager to run the building and the events that we all look forward to getting back to. I'd like to thank Jim Bovenkamp for stepping into this role as interim manager and keeping this place running while we wait for the worst of this pandemic to pass. I also want to acknowledge the leadership of Skylar McKinley, our programming coach chairperson, and with him, the help of Noel Phillips and Doug Bell. This last fiscal year, we hosted 72 events ending in February. Discussions, panels, fireside chats, both our members and the public convene at our club for critical discussions about journalism, business, politics, and the news media, and the role that a free press plays in society. The event organizers of what you are watching here tonight have all volunteered their time to make this night happen. Linda Shapley, Bruce Goldberg, and Laura Frank. I want to thank Megan Doyle for volunteering as executive producer of this event, Jim Hill and Skylar McKinley for their technical support on Zoom, Linda Shapley for moderating all those questions. I must absolutely thank my wife, Anya Semenoff, for entering all of your more than 200 names one by one into the Zoom meeting room, and so much more that, frankly, she's put up with over these last 2 years. Last but not least, I want to especially thank Jen Forker for all of her work sourcing, building, packaging, and organizing the wonderful gift boxes for the event tonight. We wanted to give you something that wasn't virtual to help connect us together on this virtual evening. All of the ingredients are sourced from Colorado small businesses and companies. Mary Sherman of Enjoy Biscotti was instrumental in this as well. And by the way, if you're curious about that black rubber ball in your gift box, that's to be filled with water and frozen. Not to throw at somebody else, but to make a large ice cube for you to drink. So enjoy that as well. Every year, we recognize a volunteer who has made an outstanding contribution to the club, and this year I'd like to recognize Jim Clark, our Vice President and Building Committee Chairman. Jim successfully applied for a $200,000 historical preservation grant that we will use to put a new roof on our building for the first time in more than 30 years. It's the largest grant we have ever received in club history. We expect construction to begin next month and be finished in the spring. He has also repaired, fixed, jury-rigged, taped, hammered, drilled, replaced, and modified so many fixtures, moldings, rickety boilers, door frames, windows, and so many other parts of this nearly 100-year-old building that I've honestly lost track of them all. He messages me at all hours of the day and night telling me about something else that needs to get fixed. In his actual job, he serves as West Region Director for the Associated Press. But Jim, I have to say, if you are ever up for a retirement gig in a few years, I think I've got the perfect job for you. The Denver Press Club, as Mike mentioned, is the nation's oldest press club, founded in 1867 before Colorado was even a state. That puts us at 153 years old this year. We've existed through world wars, the Great Depression, and notably the flu pandemic of 1918. Our longtime club historian, Alan Kanya, recently reminded me that those events in the first half of the 20th century were what sparked the club to establish the Press Benevolent Association to help the families of journalists who came to Colorado from back east, many of them unemployed at the time. They were told that Colorado's clean air, sunshine, and altitude would be beneficial to those who developed respiratory disease. We carry on this mission today in our scholarship program for the up-and-coming journalists we recognized this evening. It was just 7 months ago, and it feels like a lifetime ago, on February 21st, that I walked into Evergreen National Bank up in Evergreen with a check for more than $230,000 and paid off the club's entire mortgage, thanks to a monumental $500,000 donation from the estate of the late club member Walter Boss, a longtime photographer for Rocky Mountain PBS and KMGH, who died in June of last year. It is by far the largest gift in our club's history, and it has truly transformed us. Walter had only one request for his gift, that we set aside $1,000 each year for a scholarship in the name of John C. Enslin, the longtime club member, former club president, and co-founder of this very event, who tragically died in August of last year, just a few months after Walter himself passed. Tonight, we recognize Sam Sanson with that award. This is the first Runyon in many, many years that Walter and John are not with us. A few months ago, we honored Walter with a portrait on our legendary caricature wall, but we want to go a step further. Tonight, I am announcing the creation of the Walter Boss Memorial Scholarship, which will go annually to a student journalist in the field of video or still photography, the type of storytelling that Walter embraced during his 37-year career with Rocky Mountain PBS, Denver 7, and other TV stations. Walter was somebody, by the way, who was not interested in recognition, in acknowledgement. He wanted to do all of this work anonymously, but we feel, given the impact that he's had on us, that it is only appropriate that we continue his legacy this way as well. A few weeks after paying off that mortgage, the country and the world shut down and the club closed its doors, and except for 1 week, has not opened since. Today we are faced with a crisis similar to the ones that those early club members endured. I have no doubt that without Walter's gift, we would almost certainly have shuttered like so many other businesses during this pandemic. And now we need your support to ensure that we can continue. We've entrusted $150,000 of Walter's gift to the Denver Foundation for the start of the Denver Press Club Legacy Fund, the seed of what we hope will become the endowment that will support and fuel our future. We've saved the remainder of the gift to help us weather this storm. Walter and John both wanted to ensure that the club would exist far into the future, and it's up to all of us to ensure that we can do that. This is my last official event as president of the club after serving in this role for 2 years. I will be stepping down to attend graduate school to pursue an MBA and prepare with my wife to welcome our first child, a daughter, in January. 4 years ago, when I joined this board, we had, and I'm not exaggerating this, we had a few dollars in our checking account and piles of unpaid bills. In 4 years, with a lot of hard work and dedication by many, many people, we're in a much stronger position. We paid off our mortgage, secured grant funding to restore our building, redid our character wall, launched a new website, moved our membership system entirely online, started an endowment, hosted hundreds and hundreds of programs that impacted and influenced the public conversation. I'm pleased to announce that Kevin Vaughn, an investigative reporter for 9 News, will succeed me. Kevin has served ably as our treasurer for the last few years, and I'm fully confident in his leadership to take this club to the next level. Kevin was also a 1985 winner of the Denver Press Club Scholarship at that point as well, so his roots here go way back. We are in a much better position than we were 4 years ago, but the uncertainty and challenge of this pandemic's impact on our club, as it is with so many places, are severe. And we're not going to be hosting a Hall of Fame Awards this year, and we likely won't be able to host this event, the next Runyon, until the fall of next year, when we hope it will be safe to gather in large groups once again. We don't expect to be able to host our large holiday parties, weddings, or other events this year that are critical to generating the revenue that support our mission. So every dollar that we raise tonight means that we can put more money into scholarships, more students like the people you heard from tonight, programming, more funding into maintaining this historic building that's on the National Register of Historic Places. So if you are in a position to do so, we'd ask for your support. Please take out your phones right now and text DPC, that's DPC, to 91999, where you'll receive a link. Click on that, and you can donate easily from your phone. You can also go to denverpressclub.org/donate to give as well. I want to close with this. John Enslin once remarked, "Walking into the club always makes me feel like you're part of something bigger than your own little life, that you're part of a continuum of people who want to keep this place alive and healthy and fun over the years." I want to emphasize the uniqueness of what we have. Many other press clubs exist in name, but they do not have a place to gather. We do. A city and state like ours deserves a place, to have a place that stands up for the values of a free press, especially at a moment when there are so many challenges facing journalism today. As one of our board members, Roger Ogden, often likes to say, it's not that the Denver Press Club should survive, it is that it must survive. Again, your contributions will help preserve the Denver Press Club as a monument to journalism, both in Denver and for the world. We can't do this without you. So please consider giving what you can by texting DPC to 91999. Thanks for all you do and for being here tonight. Together, we're shaping the future of this profession with an eye toward our remarkable past.
Thank you, Dan. Great leadership over the last 4 years, and congratulations on the addition to the family. It will change your life, believe me. My oldest, also a daughter, has her degree in technical journalism from Colorado State University. Very proud of her. She's just helped me put the finishing touches on a new book I have coming out. So now it's on to the awards. Al Nakkula was a legendary police reporter for the Rocky Mountain News, whose tenacity we honor tonight with the award that bears his name. And here to introduce this year's winner is Chuck Plunkett, director of CU News Corp at the University of Colorado and the lead judge for this award. Chuck.
Hello. Each year for years now, the Al Nakkula Award for police reporting receives the most extraordinary investigative journalism you will ever hope to see. The tribute to its namesake, the late great Rocky Mountain News reporter, seems especially relevant this year. Watching over those we entrust to watch over us stands as one of our noble profession's greatest responsibilities. This year, the prize, co-sponsored by the Denver Press Club and the University of Colorado Boulder Journalism Department, should have been especially difficult to judge. We received truly amazing work from across the land, including its biggest newsrooms. But one entry stood out: the work done by Kyle Hopkins, an investigative reporter and editor for the Anchorage Daily News, in collaboration with ProPublica's local journalism partnership, would have made Al Nakkula tremendously proud. Hopkins and his colleagues showcased a two-tiered system in which Alaska's cities enjoyed professional protection by state police, while its indigenous peoples scattered across the vast state were left to a ragtag assemblage of poorly funded and trained local and village police, many of whom weren't even allowed or authorized to carry weapons, and whose ranks often attracted lawbreakers themselves. The crimes against humanity that resulted from such a system caught the eye of the U.S. Attorney General, and needed reforms had begun to be made. The team's work was so splendid, it went on to win the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service. I'd like to thank our judges, Chris Osher of the Colorado Springs Gazette, Haley Sanchez of Colorado Public Radio, Megan Schrader of the Denver Post, and Kevin Simpson of the Colorado Sun. Early at the beginning of this year, we wrapped up our work with a happy evening here at the club, sifting through the finalists from this embarrassment of riches. We thrilled to see that a local newsroom, struggling with the kind of economic headwinds that we in Colorado know all so well, were able to make such an important contribution to society and to justice. Please watch with me now this video from CU Boulder's Kimberly Coffin, highlighting the spectacular work of this year's Nakkula winner.
I'm stressed, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, and it's pretty hard when you have to arrest somebody.
As of right now, we have one village police officer hired by the city of Cayena.
Some people like you, some people don't. It's all depending, and Annie did this, Annie did that, and it's pretty hard.
We felt like we needed to explain how justice works and really doesn't work in Alaska, and especially in Alaska villages. For the past 15 years, I've worked at the Anchorage Daily News, and there was this thing that we kept seeing where there would be something would happen in a small community, and the person who was arrested for it, we would come to find would be a police officer. And there was kind of a general idea that there were many, many communities that had no law enforcement, and there were many communities that had law enforcement, but the people in those jobs were themselves sometimes criminals.
Concern within the community that if anything serious happens, that there's not an adequate response available. We should be allowed to have the same services as the municipalities like Anchorage, Fairbanks, Kenai, any of the big cities.
And what does that mean if you're the victim of a sex crime? Who is there to help you? And if there's no one there to help you, why would you report it? And if you don't report it, no one's ever held accountable. I'm a lifelong Alaskan. This has been true throughout my lifetime. How come we can't seem to reduce these problems? And so all those factors led us to do a big call out to Alaskans saying, look, we want to hear your experiences with sexual violence. And we heard from so many people, and there were so many people willing to talk about it. Individual villages were, for the most part, great. And then when we hit the state government, we were getting stonewalled. We know what the stories are here, and we just need to tell them. That can be powerful, and it doesn't have to come from the New York Times. It doesn't have to come from the Post. It can come from us, and it can still be meaningful. I need to go out and get the funding. ProPublica was just at the top of the list, and we applied for it, and we were super lucky to get accepted. And that also was just kind of rocket fuel for the reporting. And so to do something super ambitious felt out of our reach until we got that partnership. It turned out to be pretty successful. That really taught me that it's like okay to bet on yourself. It's okay to be ambitious because it might actually work out.
Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy this message from this year's Nakkula Award winner, Kyle Hopkins.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Alaska. I'm so excited to have received the Nakkula Award from the University of Colorado Boulder Journalism Department and from the Denver Press Club. I feel like this was, when it was announced at the beginning of the year, it was kind of the first thing that made me feel good about what we had done the previous year with our Lawless series. We'd spent a year working with ProPublica, doing these stories about a lack of justice, a lack of law enforcement in Alaska, and very much with the feeling of, is anyone going to care about this? Are people going to say, so what? Or are they going to say, that was obvious? Or are they going to say, this was a waste of time? And so, we were lucky to get a response from government to the stories. And when this award was announced, when I got the call, really back at the beginning of the year, it just was this gratifying moment of feeling like, other journalists and other people who know what we do appreciated the work. And it was, really meaningful. And I so appreciate it. And it also came at a time when, and for a newspaper, the Anchorage Daily News, that is emerging from bankruptcy, where, like many of you were kind of fighting for survival, we're very unsure of the future and what's going to happen with our jobs. And so this kind of thing, it just, it makes me feel like I'm part of a fraternity, and that my, my colleagues appreciate what I do. And so I just wanted to say thank you so much. And I wish I was there with you, and hope to visit Colorado sometime when we're all traveling again.
Thank you, Chuck, and congratulations, Kyle. Now, as part of this year's Damon Runyon Award, the City of Denver will also honor Judy Woodruff. And here to read a proclamation from Mayor Michael Hancock is City Council member Kevin Flynn.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everybody. I'm here to represent Mayor Michael Hancock and to read a proclamation honoring Judy Woodruff. Proclamation, whereas Judy Woodruff is one of the nation's foremost women broadcast journalists and has worked in network, cable, and public television news since 1975. And whereas Judy Woodruff is managing editor of the always poised anchor of PBS NewsHour, who is comfortable asking the tough questions and stands out whether she's delivering the news, interviewing newsmakers, or telling us insights about Americans who were taken away by the coronavirus. And whereas Judy Woodruff hosted Inside Politics and CNN Worldview on that cable network, served as White House correspondent for NBC News, and anchored Frontline with Judy Woodruff from 1984 to 1990. And whereas Judy Woodruff has worked with so many notable broadcasters, including Gwen Ifill, Jim Lehrer, and Bernard Shaw. And whereas Judy Woodruff has graciously joined us tonight for our first ever virtual Damon Runyon Award banquet, speaking to us from the nation's capital. And whereas the Denver Press Club has named Judy Woodruff winner of the 26th annual Damon Runyon Award for Outstanding Journalism. Therefore, I, Michael B. Hancock, Mayor of the City and County of Denver, Colorado, by virtue of the authority vested in me, do hereby declare September 12th, 2020 to be known as Judy Woodruff Day. Congratulations, Judy. We'll get a copy of this to you. Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councilman Flynn, and congratulations to Judy Woodruff. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the presentation of this year's Damon Runyon Award. And here to introduce her is Laura Frank, who leads the Colorado News Collaborative, which represents more than 60 news organizations across the state. Laura?
Thank you very much, Mike. Good evening, everyone. We are coming to you live from the historic Denver Press Club in downtown Denver, and welcome to Judy Woodruff Day here. You know, I will tell you before I introduce Judy, who probably needs no introduction to all of you, we're going to have you, give you the chance to ask Judy some questions. So the way you do it is to type the question that you have into the chat on Zoom. So you're welcome to start doing that as soon as you want to. I'm giving you that heads up, and then we will have a conversation with Judy. So sit back and just relish the rest of this hour. It is my honor to introduce Judy Woodruff, who is anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour. She joined the NewsHour in 1983 as White House correspondent and was there in a decade. In 1993, she went to CNN, and you may recall there she was the anchor of Inside Politics. After 13 years with CNN, she returned to PBS NewsHour. And in 2013, she and Gwen Ifill were named co-anchors of the PBS NewsHour, and that represented the first U.S. network television to be anchored by two female anchors. And there was a lot of celebration throughout the country at this time. So it is my honor to welcome Judy to receive this award and to have a conversation with us. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you, Laura. I am incredibly touched, especially touched by the proclamation that Councilman Flynn read from Mayor Hancock. I don't think I've ever had a day named after me. My children will be very impressed by this. But it's such a treat. I wish I were there with all of you in person. We all know it's circumstances beyond control that we're virtual, but I am no less honored and thrilled to be with you virtually tonight. It's just a treat. I love your city, I love your state, and I'm incredibly happy tonight.
Well, and so are we. I will share with all of the folks on Zoom that we had a short VIP and celebration with the scholarship winners. And I told the story that we actually had quite a bit of trouble scheduling Judy because she she's working all the time. And so we're thrilled that you could spend this time with us. You know, you have been, I think someone mentioned, covering elections since 1976. I believe you were about 12 years old then when you started, is that right? Have you ever covered an election like this?
Oh, Laura, such a great question. And it's hard to believe it goes back to 1976. I know a lot of the scholarship winners who, by the way, I'm so proud of them. I loved hearing their stories and loved hearing about why they have decided to pursue journalism, whether it's writing or storytelling or photography, whatever. I love hearing that. And journalism is going to be so much richer because of young people like each one of them. But no, I've never seen anything like 2020. I thought I had seen everything in the year 2000 when the election, as some of us who were around covering the Bush v. Gore face-off, thought we would never see an election where we didn't have a result on election night. We went 37 more days. It was ultimately decided by the United States Supreme Court. This year, we hope to have a result, if not on November 3rd, but soon after. But we'll see. I mean, we know that more than right now, 60% of Americans are telling the pollsters they plan to vote by mail. If that holds up, there's a very good chance we won't know the result on election night. We'll be waiting for days and possibly longer afterwards, and we'll see what happens. But it's not just, Laura, it's not just the counting of the votes, it's the atmosphere and the circumstances in which it takes place. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. We've lost over 190,000 American lives. We've had millions of Americans infected. We still don't have this virus, this coronavirus, under control. And we have a campaign going on in the midst of it. We have a reckoning over racial justice in this country. We have an economy that is struggling. So in so many ways, this is an election like no other.
You know, I find it interesting. NewsHour actually got its start at the time of Watergate, reporting about Watergate. And just this week, we have Bob Woodward, our award winner from last year here at the Denver Press Club. We have his release of tapes, recording of the current president. And I'm wondering what you think about that. We have actually a question from one of our participants, Casey Nicoloric, who's actually from one of our gold sponsors. Thank you, Casey, from 1010 Group. Casey asks, from a journalist perspective, do you think Bob Woodward should have reported on what he knew about the president lying to the public before the publication of his book? What would you have done with that knowledge?
It's a very good question, and it's one that I plan to ask Bob Woodward when I interview him next week. He is committed to do an interview on the NewsHour, so I will be asking him that. I have read Bob's answer to that question from other media reporters who asked him why you had this. His answer, I will tell you, is that he said he didn't know back in January and February whether what the president was telling him was the whole story. He didn't know whether to believe it. He didn't have the context. He also didn't know early in 2020 that the president had been given a dire warning and such a dire description from senior people in his administration, his new national security advisor, others who he entrusted with this huge responsibility. There were at least two people telling him, this is a deadly virus. It's going to wreak havoc on this country. If Woodward didn't know that until well into the spring, I think he said April or May. The question was then, well, if you were even told then, why didn't you share it? And I think it's a question to ask him. I think you can't know how you would respond, how you would react, unless you're in that situation. People criticize Bob Woodward because he's written so many books. And they're saying, if you have enough information, why don't you get it out in the newspaper the day of? His answer is, I wanted to get the whole context. So I'm waiting to hear from him.
Very good. Judy, would you talk a little bit about, we saw several of our scholarship winners mention this issue of the cry of fake news and the attitude about journalists, and we've seen some, well, I think we saw pictures of some pretty terrible signs and t-shirts about the role that journalists have. Could you talk a little bit about the dynamic between media and the government as you see it now and how that compares to years past?
We are in a worse place than we've ever been. I hate to give such a negative impression, but that's what I believe. I've never seen, I feel like I'm saying it over and over again, I've never seen an election like this one. I've never seen relations between the media and government at this level. It's not just the media, the news media and government though, Laura, it's also between the media and the American people. The level of distrust has never been higher than it is today, at least not in my experience. And I think we in the press now have a particular responsibility to not only, we're always working hard, we're always vetting our reporting. Those of us who take our work seriously, and 99.9% of us do. I will defend the reporters I know to my dying breath. They work at it, they care about their reputation. At the same time, we are a much more opinion-driven country than we were before. There are people who are going into journalism just for opinion, just to push one side of an argument or another, just to be an advocate. And I think that's hurt journalism overall. I have nothing against people expressing their views, but when you've got information coming at you like a fire hose, as we do now, and a lot of it is frankly being pushed by people who have an agenda, and then you have players involved now, not just foreign countries who are trying to interfere in our election process, in our politics, the Russians and others. And you have people who just want to create mayhem. There's a lot more for the American people to figure out, and there's a lot more for journalists to figure out. And so I hope when this election is over, we'll have a chance to sort of take a deep breath collectively as a country and have a real conversation about this. But I do worry, Laura, that we are now past the point where many people will trust the press, and we're going to have to work to win that trust back.
Well, and then, so this question from Alan Kenya is perfect to follow up with that, Judy. How can journalists and news organizations regain the confidence of the public after 4 years of fake news and overall loss of our credibility with the public?
Well, one thing we can do, the first thing we have to do, is to keep reporting aggressively, intentionally, going after the stories that count, not flagging, not taking, not getting upset by criticism, but forging ahead. This country needs a strong press to keep our democracy strong. That's never been clearer to me than it is today. And reporters have to keep at it. We have to keep working. We have to keep asking the tough questions. We have to keep holding officials accountable. That doesn't mean we have to be cynical about the people who serve. In fact, I think there's been too much of that, and maybe we want to talk about that later in our conversation. But we have to keep at our job. And along the way, I hope we'll have an opportunity to regain the trust of the American people. But it's not going to be easy, because a number of people look now at the press. They see the opinion side of the press, and it's very powerful. It's out there every day. You turn on your computer, it's wherever you go. There are stories being pushed to advocate for one side or another, and people are having a harder and harder time finding what's fact, what's truth, or what's been vetted, what's been checked out. And we are going to need to stick to it and not flag. I mean that quite seriously. That's why we need the young people who you're honoring today with these scholarships.
Well, I want to go to a question from a relatively young journalist, and maybe if my producer can help me get back to the question from Stina that I saw, Stina Sieg, who is a journalist here in Colorado. And Judy, let's talk about, you brought up the issue of how to avoid becoming cynical. Stina would like to know, How do you keep reporting the news when the news gets so grim? How do you give space for that pain without getting overwhelmed by it? Or, as you said, slipping into cynicism?
Well, I'm asked that question very often because so much of the news we're reporting right now is difficult news to report. It's about the pandemic. It's about people hurting in this economy. It's about children not being able to go to school. It's about people standing in food lines. It's about, frankly, the darker side of life. After all, we know that's what news, by definition, it often is. It's about people in difficulty. It's about the legislation that didn't get passed, the fights that they have, whether it's the state legislature or in the Congress. It's about whatever other pronouncement a president or one of our national leaders makes that is then criticized by somebody else. It's conflict, it's drama, it's failure, and it's tragedy. And that is so much of what news is. My answer is simply that my job is to report, but it is also to be an American citizen and to understand that people are hurting and to understand that part of our job is to remind them that there are, frankly, uplifting things going on in our country at the same time. For example, at the NewsHour, we do a regular feature we call Canvas, where we highlight the work of writers, poets, musicians, and others who are bringing us some of the uplifting ways they're dealing with this crisis that we're living through. So we try to do that. But personally, Laura, it's reminding myself that, you know, this is my job. I have to keep going. And I'm an optimist by nature. I believe that we are going to get through this. But I will not tell you it's easy. I mean, there have been nights when I finished the program and I've been almost in tears or sometimes in the middle of the program, because of something we're reporting.
I would maybe like to go then to something that is a little bit more uplifting. You know, Judy, so many people see you as a trailblazer. And I mentioned in the opening that you and Gwen Ifill were the first all-female team to be named co-anchors of a national U.S. broadcast. And, you know, so much of what we're seeing today with the push for racial justice in this country, I would love to hear your thoughts on the importance of diversity in helping journalism bring those stories to the American people, what kind of difference it can make if we can accomplish that level of diversity.
It's hugely important. I've always believed that the news media should look like America. Journalists should be holding up a mirror to the country and reporting on stories across the spectrum of the United States and the world, for that matter. And we need to look like America. We need to be the people who are reporting, who are producing, who are writing, who are behind the camera. For us as a television news organization and in front of the camera, we need to look like America. And we can always do a better job of that. I think obviously decades went by before there was any attention paid to diversity among journalists. And it's, you know, journalism as a profession has not, I think, covered itself in glory for a very long time. But now I see an awakening, a reawakening, if you will. I like to think at the NewsHour, this is something we've been conscious of for years and years. We believe in it fiercely, in having not just a diverse core of our staff, but also making sure that the people we invite to be on the program as analysts, as experts, as representatives of whether it's our political life or our education or our economy, whatever aspect of American life it is, that it's diverse, that we push the envelope, if you will, to be diverse. But we have to keep on doing it. I'm not going to tell you we're perfect. We've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. And we just have to keep pushing, hold our feet to the fire.
I have a question related to that. If we could, I saw it higher up. I'm talking to my producer now from Sarah, I believe. Okay, there it is. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Sarah Yusufzai. I'm sorry if I've messed that up, Sarah. With the passing of Gwen Ifill, we lost a prominent and groundbreaking Black journalist. Many American newsrooms continue to struggle with hiring, developing, advancing, and retaining Black, Indigenous, people of color journalists. With the need to have diverse perspectives, there's renewed urgency. How is NewsHour addressing this critical gap, and what are you working on to foster more diversity and true inclusion in the newsroom?
It's a very good question. Thank you. Is it Sarah?
I believe so, yes.
Sarah, it's a very good question. It's something that we've been dedicated to for a long time, but I would say that right now there's even more urgency around it because of the social justice movement in the country. We have a diverse newsroom. Not everyone in our newsroom of 150 people, you don't see them all on the air. The ones you see on the air besides me are our correspondents, Yamiche Alcindor, Amna Nawaz, who happens to be an Asian journalist. Her family was originally from Pakistan, her parents. So she's Pakistani, although born in the United States. John Yang is clearly another Asian journalist. So, and we have a number of producers, writers, researchers, and technical people who are represent a cross-section of America, but of races and all sorts of diversity. But having said that, we want to do better. So we are talking among ourselves. I mean, some of this has been, I have to say, it's not that it's put to the side, but it's having to compete with covering the story. We are all working harder right now than we've ever worked. The news day doesn't end, the news week doesn't end. We are in a 24/7 news cycle. Even though the news hour is Monday through Friday night for an hour, and then there's a weekend news hour, we are all paying attention to what's going on in the news all the time. NewsHour online is on all the time and available all the time. Our social media presence is always there. So covering the news never slows down. And that's probably, I have to say, that's meant that we have to juggle these questions of hiring and promotion at the same time we're covering the news. But I can assure you, Sarah, it is of the utmost priority for all of us at the NewsHour.
We have a question from Holly Gaunt, who is working in a newsroom here in Denver, and she asks, how do you think we overcome the issues of living in a cancel culture? When we report about any negative sides of the Black Lives Matter protests, we're considered racist. It's very tricky these days.
It is tricky, and we in the media are caught up in it. We are, in fact, on the front lines of that because we are the ones who are expected to do the reporting, urgent reporting, and then more thoughtful, in-depth reporting, not just on Black Lives Matter, on the fight for racial justice, on the kinds of questions we were just discussing about how do we bring the news media, how do we bring American politics, how do we bring American corporations and American universities to the point where we all should be when it comes to racial and ethnic and religious diversity. But at the same time, we don't want to be in a position of shutting people down and saying, because this movement is happening and it's important, that we don't want to hear any other voices. It's not black or white. It's not all good and or all bad. And so we want to be a place, the NewsHour wants to be a place that's open for those conversations and open for those debates. But you're absolutely right to ask this question because sometimes I think as a country we can get swept up in a movement. For example, whether it's LGBTQ as a set of issues, incredibly important for us to cover, as is this movement for racial justice right now. And we need to reflect all sides of it. We need to hear another side at the same time, and we need to make space for that in our coverage.
So much of what journalists are doing today is making space for the many burning issues that we have, and sometimes literally burning issues that we have going on. Leanne Colasiopo, who is from the Denver Post, leads the Denver Post here in Denver, asks, can you give any advice for people who are reporting in hostile environments?
Does she mean in the United States?
Yes. Yes.
Covering protests, for example?
Could be. I don't know. She didn't elaborate, but I'm going to elaborate for her. I believe she's talking about hostile environments. It may be people talking about fake news can turn into a hostile environment. We've had journalists who, who have been fired upon with tear gas here in Denver, for example. There have been some really touchy situations, not foreign, but domestic, right here in Colorado. So I think in general, do you have any thoughts on, because I'm sure you've found yourself in some of these kinds of situations over the years, how do you handle those hostile to journalism or journalists environments?
It's interesting because the timing of the question is interesting. I was just today talking this afternoon to a journalist friend who's been through the training for covering protests, the kind of training that I'm sure we wish had been around years ago during the civil rights movement. I don't think they offered it, anything like that back then. But today, it was initially offered to journalists going overseas to cover conflict. But now, there's no question, journalists are finding themselves in situations where they need to know how to keep safe, how to stay safe in order to do their job. I think we're talking about two things. I think in terms of physical safety, if you are in a situation where you are physically in danger, I would hope that the journalists who are given those assignments are also given the kind of training that they need to know how to handle themselves. It's not a simple thing. It's more than just a matter of using good judgment. Things can get out of control very quickly. And journalists need to be able to keep reporting. They need to be able to do their job so that the public can hear and get the story. The other hostile environment I'm thinking about, Laura, though, of course, is politically. Mm-hmm. Whether you're covering Capitol Hill, or you're attending a White House press briefing, or you are talking to a group of voters, although that ability today is restricted because of COVID. We are now talking to voters via Zoom or FaceTime. We're trying to find different ways to reach American voters to cover this election. But wherever it is, we expect to be met with hostility. Journalists were never going to win a popularity contest. That's not what reporters do. It's not why we went into this business. But I don't think we've ever seen the kind of hostility that we see now. And it goes back to your question earlier about the distrust of the media. My answer is simply, we have to do our job. Try to go into the interview, the conversation with an open mind, listen, but also stand your ground. If someone is accusing you of lying, making it up, distorting, leaning to the other side, stand your ground. You have to stand your ground, but don't get into an argument with I don't think that's productive. I mean, I've long said that when we are criticized by politicians like the president, it doesn't serve us well to get into a back and forth with them. They can make their points. We stand our ground. We defend our work. We state the facts. We point out when they say things that are incorrect, that can't be borne out by facts. But it's not our job or our role to get into conflict with them.
It's a difficult line to walk. It's
not a very difficult line to walk. It's never been I feel like I'm complaining a lot, Laura, and I'm trying to come across with a more positive perspective. But this is a tough time. It's a tough time to be journalists. I don't want to discourage the young ones because, hey, I'm looking at you now, you college students who are going into journalism. There's a place for you. We need you. And you are going to find a way to work through this, and you're going to rebuild, I believe, trust in American journalism. But right now, we are in a fraught, polarized political environment where a lot of people only believe one side of the news, and they don't want to hear anything else. And they don't want to hear. I mean, I know because the NewsHour reports, right? We report all sides of the story. Our philosophy is let the viewers and our followers, digital followers, let them decide. But a lot of folks don't like what you report if it doesn't fit what they already believe, whether it's over here or over there. But hey, it's not going to stop us. It's not going to slow us down.
Right, and I'm sure you've had the experience where either side of an issue, if there are only two sides, and we're going to get to a question about that in a second, hear something different from whatever reporting that you've done, which is always a phenomenon that amazes me. But you've touched on something. I am watching as the chat questions are coming in, and so many are coming from journalists. And I know our audience, our guests on Zoom are not all journalists, but they're really reaching out with something. I'm going to call Nicole Vapp, who is at our 9 News station here in Denver. She says, for so many years, we were taught to get both sides of a story. How that has impacted journalism, how has that impacted journalism, and how do you, at NewsHour, look for more than both sides?
It's an excellent question, thank you. I was taught to my job was to go out and cover the story. In fact, I had a producer, my first job as a reporter at the CBS affiliate in Atlanta. He said to me, nobody cares what Judy Woodruff thinks. Don't forget that. And by the way, I had not studied journalism. I had majored in political science and and frankly was learning on the job. But he said, don't go out there and think nobody cares about what you think. We don't want that. We want you to go and collect the story. Come back with a story. Write what you've learned, what people are telling you, what you're finding from document reporting, because I was covering the state legislature. And then the viewers decide, the followers, people who follow us decide. Today, that's gotten a lot trickier because information is put out on a regular basis that just isn't true, that is misleading, that is not factual. And I think it's our job, as I think I said, I'm repeating myself, I think we have to point that out. But the fact, we can't point out every single misstatement. We have to pick and choose in an hour of news every night. And then in our digital platform for the NewsHour and through social media, we have an opportunity to correct the record, if you will, to make sure people who are reading us or listening to us or watching us get the straight story. But we don't have time to correct everything. So we've got to pick and choose. That's where news judgment comes in. We're going to think, okay, what are the 5 or 10 most important pieces of information we're going to get across tonight? And if there's some question about the veracity in one of those stories, we've got to set it straight. We point out, so-and-so said this, but in fact, it's this. So-and-so, repeated this. It's not true. I'm hesitant to keep saying the president. Clearly the president is part of that, but there are other politicians as well. Other figures who are making newsmakers, who say things that are false. And I think we are now, it's harder for journalists because we have to be we have to be fact checkers. We have to be vetters. And her question was, are you able to do more than that? And yes, when we have time, we have to do more than that. We've got to put things in context. We want to provide a historical perspective. And our job is to find that sweet spot. How do we tell you the important information, but also give you the context so that you understand what really matters here. And leaning on us, trusting our judgment, you know, to pick and choose the part of the story that we think is the most important. I don't know if that makes sense, but if it sounds complicated, it's complicated.
It is complicated. You know, my background is as an investigative reporter, and I feel like in the past, you had to kind of dig out to figure out that something was a lie. And I feel like what is different now is that the lies are kind of just on the surface, almost unapologetically untruths, and daring journalists to keep up with a fire hose to try to figure out what they're going to be able to correct in the record and not. Do you ever feel that way?
Completely unapologetically, at times, that's the right word, shameless.
Yes.
Shameless. Statements that are just wrong, and about science, about data that comes out of the Census Bureau or another agency of the Labor Department.
Things that can
Bureau
be
of Labor
checked.
Statistics.
Right. Yes,
Agencies
right.
that we used to say, well, you know, if the census says it, or if you know, the State Department says X or Y about, but today we have to check everything.
Yes,
check
yes.
everything. And that's why my colleagues, some of them are working 24/7. I don't know when Yamiche Alcindor sleeps, or Lisa Desjardins, who covers the Hill for us, or any of my colleagues for that matter, because if you're reporting on a beat, your work, you never can rest. The news is churning constantly, and it's your responsibility to know if something is right or not, and to put it in context. And if it's not right, to help us understand why isn't it, and what are the facts here?
Well, Julie Lucas would like to hear a story from you. She asks, can you talk about the most difficult or intense moment in an interview where you spoke truth to power? In other words, you confronted a falsehood or a lie during an interview. Can you recall a time like that for us?
It's a great question. I would say there have been more of those kinds of interviews in the last few years than ever before in my career. And I don't want to single out, I will just say there are a couple of individuals I've interviewed just in the last few weeks, and I'm hesitant to name names, who spouted the record of the other party's presidential nominee and made statements about what was true and what wasn't. And again, I'm hesitant to name names because there are a lot, I'll put it that way. But I absolutely push back, whether it was somebody saying that Joe Biden believes in defunding the police, which he does not believe, or that statements about positions on abortion. They're just sweeping statements being made from both sides, and they were coming in a flood during the conventions. I was interviewing a number of politicians every day during the Democratic convention, the Republican convention, and I would stop people mid-sentence and say, in fact, that's not correct. But there's no backing down anymore, Laura. I mean, when our elected leaders, many of them make these statements now, they don't back off. They just make them, and they say, you in the media, often, you in the media are wrong. You're cheering for the other side, which is false. We're not cheering for the other side. We're doing our job. But the challenge is when you're doing an interview and somebody spouts 6 or 7 or 8 falsehoods in a row, and you've got a 7 or 8 minute interview, and you only have time to challenge them or set it straight on 4 or 5 of those 6 or 7, and you've got to pick and choose which ones.
I want to go back to someone, I believe it was Angie Chung, wanted to follow up on Nicole Vapp's question. And her question is, how do we avoid creating narratives of false balance by giving disproportionate voice to potentially fringe voices. So an example of this would be, I would say, the early coverage of climate change. And when we gave, journalists, I would say, gave equal play to both sides of the story. How do you, she brings up climate deniers as an example, and also white supremacists. So how do you avoid creating this false equivalency about the weight of evidence or what the truth is?
It's another excellent question, and it's something we've confronted time and again at the NewsHour. The NewsHour came out of a tradition from the earliest days of Robert McNeil and Jim Lehrer of being the place that listened to all sides of the story, both sides of the story or all sides, if it was something more complicated than that. That's who we are. That's in our DNA, to listen to both sides and let viewers, observers, followers online, the digital audience, make up their own minds. But you're absolutely right. When there was a real debate about climate change, that was one thing. But when you were now at the point where, what is it, 97, 98% of all the scientists who study the climate say there's no question the climate is changing, and we are in the midst of something that is accelerating, and we have to pay attention to it. And the same thing with white supremacists. I mean, who is in favor of white supremacy? And even if they are, we're not going to give them equal time. We cover what they are saying so that people understand that point of view still exists in this country. There are people who fiercely hold those views, and they go to Charlottesville, Virginia, and other places, and they march, and there are tragedies at times after they make their voices heard. But we have to make judgment calls along the way. I would say, Laura, it's a moving target. I mean, we have to deal with these issues as they come along, and when it gets to a point where equivalency is just clearly wrong, you know, we take that into account, and that's how we cover the story. But it's a moving target, because our understanding of what's going on in the world, in our lives, is changing all the time because of science, because of social science, because of our politics, because of who we are as people. And we have to be aware of that. But we always want to be committed to the facts, and the facts aren't going to lead you wrong.
You know, related to that, there's a question from Jody Gersh, and Jody would like to know if you have any advice for journalists who are covering topics that they're also actually personally affected by.
Very good. And to think about, especially right now, because I know I've had conversations with my friends who happen to be Black about covering the racial justice and how they think about it. And we talk about being honest. You know, if your views are such that you have an opinion, a strong opinion going into covering something, you need to be upfront about it. And if that means that, you know, whether it's that subject or something else, say it's abortion, you know, which is, you know, people hold very strong views on both sides about abortion. Are you able to cover it if you have a strong view? My answer is yes, if you're able to keep your view to yourself and you're still able to have and do an interview, do reporting, and keep your personal views out of it. But there's so many other subjects. I mean, school choice, gun rights, gun control. I know journalists who have very strong views one way or another on the gun issue. We still have to be able to cover those tough subjects and keep our personal views out of it. I think my sense is that if your personal view is so strong that you just have a hard time keeping it, I should say, listening to the other side, then I think you have to pull back a little. And I know there's some journalists who disagree. I've had conversations with journalists who say there's a place for advocacy journalism, and I agree with that, but I think it should be labeled. advocacy journalism, and that's different from the kind of straight reporting that I think you and I are talking about.
I have a question from another newsroom leader here in Denver, Megan Jurgemeyer. You mentioned how your staff is working harder than ever. She says, I think other newsrooms can relate to that.
Everybody is.
Yes, everyone is, you're right. How do you continue doing a job that's more important than ever before while also taking care of your physical and mental health?
Somebody asked me that very question today. I would say that number one, I love my work so much that I don't think of it as work all the time, even though it is, yes, it's work, but it's work that I love, and I'm energized by it. I'm energized by all the work that we are challenged to do, the reporting we're challenged to do every day. But you're right, I have to get sleep. At the end, I would say the weekend after the 2 conventions, I was pretty wiped. And I think I went to sleep. I told my husband I went to sleep that Friday night. I said, I don't know what time I'm going to wake up on Saturday. I may not get up. But of course, I got up. It was 8 o'clock, before 8 o'clock in the morning, and we were at it again. Because the story doesn't go away. The story gets even bigger after the conventions. But I keep going because I love it. And I think that's the same. It's the same is true with my colleagues. And it's not just all of us at the NewsHour who are working hard. Every journalist I know is working hard. And in fact, people, I know my family members who have work in different professions, teachers, people I know who are, raising children, homemaking, trying to teach children at home. And we're all called on right now to step up our energy level and support each other.
I would like to ask you, Judy, what are some things that are giving you hope right now? What are some bright spots that you're seeing?
Well, for me, it's the American people. And I know that may sound corny, but I've covered this country for 40, 50 years. Can I whisper that?
Yeah.
A long
Yes.
time. And time and again, the American people rise to the occasion. It doesn't mean that we don't go through tough periods where people get some crazy ideas in their head. And I think, there are some crazy ideas floating around right now that I hope don't become majority ideas. But it's us, it's who we are, it's our democracy. It's the fact that we do believe in ferreting out facts and eventually getting to the truth. Oh, we know the truth's a whole lot harder to get to, but eventually we come to it over time. It's because we care about that. We care about things like equity. We care that people are treated fairly. We care that people are fed in this country. We care that people have lost their jobs. And the fact that we can talk about that, the fact that we can reflect on what we're learning from this pandemic, and we are all learning a lot, that gives me hope. And I have to say, this is going to sound really curious, but every Friday night on the NewsHour, we end with an in memoriam. We tell the stories of 5 individuals who've been lost in the pandemic. That information comes from their families and their friends. And it reminds me that ordinary Americans are really remarkable, whether they're teachers or police officers or gardeners or homemakers or, they're the ones. I've listened to those stories and I've just been, it's taken my breath away. But that's what gives me hope.
Well, Judy, tonight you've talked a lot about the future of journalism and especially related to our scholarships winners. So I'm going to close with a question from one of our scholarship winners, Brooke Buchanan. And she asks about your future. What are you looking forward to?
Wow. Well, right now,
what are some of your future goals?
It's all I can do to see to next week when we're going to be covering the aftermath of Congress not being able to come up to any sort of agreement on COVID relief. I'm going to be interviewing Bob Woodward, which I've already mentioned, but honestly focusing on this election. At some point, we will decide it's time for me to do something different. But right now I am so fulfilled and just captivated by the story of our time. And I'm sad about it. I'm energized by it. I'm torn up about it. I'm everything you can imagine. And I'm invested in it. And it's what drives me every single day. And it's what drives every journalist I know.
Well, Judy, it has been an honor for all of us to have you with us tonight. Thank you for sharing your insights, your stories, and your inspiring hope for the future. We can all benefit from coming together and sharing some hope right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And to the Denver Press Club, I'm just incredibly honored. The phone's ringing, as you can hear.
It's
My
time to
husband
go,
just got
right?
it. The Damon Runyon Award, such an honor. Thank you all very much. And I hope to get to Denver one of these days, post-pandemic, to thank you all in person. Thank you, Laura, so much.
You're so welcome.
To all the winners.
We will be here waiting when you get here. You know, I want to personally also thank everyone who joined us in the Zoom and the stream tonight. You know, the fact that a free press is protected in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution speaks to the vital role that it plays in a functioning democracy. And I would say Judy has given us such a window into that role and the impact tonight. You know, Dan, our Denver Press Club president, has reminded us of the historic role of the nation's oldest press club and the part it's played in Colorado history. And our scholarship winners, you know, have inspired us about the future of the press. And if you feel the inspiration, the urgency, and the importance of all of this tonight, please join me in making a gift to the Denver Press Club to uplift the role of a free press in our society. And I choose those words very carefully, because if we've been reminded of anything tonight, it is that this is our American society, and we can each do our part to uphold it. Making a gift, any amount that is right for you, is really easy. You simply text the letters DPC, which of course stand for Denver Press Club, to the number 91999. It's very easy. You can take out your phone right now and type in 91999 in your text, and then just add in DPC where you would put the message, and it'll come right to us. You'll get a link, and then you can make a donation, or you could open another window in your browser right now and go to denverpressclub.org/donate. I encourage you to make a gift right now. You will feel so good if you do. Thank you again for joining us tonight to honor one of America's most dedicated journalists, Judy Woodruff, and to support America's longest standing press club, the Denver Press Club. Take care and good night, and I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you, Laura. Great job. And congratulations to Judy and to all of our scholarship winners. Well, folks, that's our show for the evening. In another year, I'd like to invite you to join all of us in a Runyon tradition, a nightcap at the Denver Press Club. And while we can't do that tonight, you should know that events like this are what keep this club going. It's thanks to you that the club will still be here when this is all over, waiting to welcome all of you home. Good night and stay safe.